Welcome to Revelation Unraveled. I'm your host, William Tapley, also known as the third eagle of the apocalypse and the co-prophet of the end times. On this program, I want to talk about World War III and how it is in fact a Gog Magog war. In St. John's book of Revelation, he speaks about 3 different wars, but he only labels one as a Gog Magog war. And that is the last war, which occurs after the 1,000 years of peace. In other words, after the millennium. Now this last war is the only war that St. John labels as a Gog Magog war. But I think we will find out on this program that all 3 wars are Gog Magog types of war. In chapter 20, St. John writes, "And when the 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison." Now these 1,000 years refer to the millennium. "And shall go out and deceive the nations, which are in the 4 quarters of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together for battle." Now this is the last war in the book of Revelation, and it is the only war which St. John describes as a Gog Magog war. Now let's look at the war which St. John calls Armageddon. In chapter 16, St. John writes, "For they are the spirits of demons working miracles, which go forth unto the kings of the whole earth, to gather them together to the battle of that great day of God Almighty." Now this refers to the Antichrist gathering the kings of the earth, that is, all the leaders of the world's nations, to Israel, to battle against Jesus. All the kings includes the nation of Israel, which will be one of the nations which battles against Jesus. And in verse 16, "And he gathered them together into a place called in the Hebrew language Armageddon." Notice that St. John does not call this a Gog Magog war. He calls it Armageddon, which leads to a very interesting question. The question is, why does St. John call this battle Armageddon? Because this same battle between Jesus and the Antichrist is called a Gog Magog war in the book of Ezekiel. Now St. John certainly knew that Ezekiel called this war Gog Magog, but he deliberately called his last war Gog Magog, and he changed the name of this war to Armageddon. I believe the reason St. John changed the name was to indicate that he does not necessarily call a Gog Magog war a Gog Magog war. And that means it is very likely that the first war he describes, which is World War III, is also a Gog Magog war. In other words, if St. John declined to name the Armageddon War as a Gog Magog war, when it clearly is, from Ezekiel, a Gog Magog war, then World War III is also a Gog Magog war. St. John describes World War III in chapter 17. "And the 10 horns which you saw upon the beast." Now this beast is the scarlet beast, which represents communism. "These shall hate the harlot." Now the harlot is Babylon, in other words, England and America, and the West. "And shall make her desolate, and shall eat her flesh, and shall burn her with fire." As we shall see, this fire is a 1-hour devastation, almost certainly nuclear war. And St. John continues, "Thus with violence shall that great city Babylon be thrown down and found no more." So why is it important that we know this is also a Gog Magog war? Because it will help us to identify who the scarlet beast is. The terms Gog and Magog are really not that difficult to identify. Gog will be the leader of these nations. At Armageddon, he is the Antichrist. During the last Gog Magog war, after the millennium, he will be a post-cursor of the Antichrist. And at World War III, 7 years before Armageddon, he will be a precursor of the Antichrist. Now, Magog is a specific geographical region. It lies on the border between Russia and Iran. Magog therefore symbolizes a coalition between communist and Muslim nations. The scarlet beast with the 10 horns, which will defeat the United States, England, and the capitalist West, is represented by this coalition called Magog. This scarlet beast is also known as the 7th beast, the beast that was and is not and goes to destruction. The term "is not" refers to the collapse of communism. Following World War III, communism will be revived as the 8th beast, and its headquarters will move from Moscow to Rome. And at that time, the European Union will give its kingdom, that is Rome, to the beast. And as always, remember, God does not reveal the future to scare us, but to prepare us. And if you need more information, simply write to the address you see on your screen.